My parents left the company to my brother, until the hidden clause gave me full control instead. I stood in the cold, sterile conference room, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the table. My brother Ethan sat across from me, his smug grin cutting deeper than any knife. The lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, adjusted his glasses, his voice steady but heavy with something unspoken. As per the will of Margaret and Thomas Bennett, he began, the family company, Bennett Construction, is to be transferred in its entirety to Ethan James Bennett. The words hit like a punch to the gut. My parents' company, the one I'd poured my heart into for years, was being handed to Ethan, who hadn't set foot in the office in a decade. My sister-in-law Claire squeezed his arm, her diamond earrings glinting under the fluorescent lights. My cousins, aunts, and uncles sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between us. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but my throat locked up. How could they do this to me? Ethan leaned back, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Grace, you know Mom and Dad always trusted me to take the lead. I stared at him, my mind racing. Trusted him? The guy who partied through college while I stayed up late balancing the company's books? The guy who moved to California and left me to care for our parents when they got sick? This wasn't just unfair, it was a betrayal. Hey, real quick, where are you all watching from? Drop a comment with your city or country. Love hearing where this story's reaching. Let's get back to it. I forced myself to breathe, my nails digging into my palms. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as Mr. Hargrove shuffled his papers. There was something in his hesitation, a flicker in his eyes, but I couldn't place it. Not yet. All I knew was that everything I'd worked for, every late night, every sacrifice, was slipping through my fingers. And Ethan? He was already mentally spending the profits. Let me take you back a bit, to when things weren't so jagged. Growing up in our small Ohio town, Ethan and I were close, best friends even. Mom and Dad built Bennett Construction from nothing, turning a tiny contracting gig into a multi-million-dollar business. I was the kid trailing Dad at job sites, learning how to read blueprints before I could drive. Ethan? He was charming, always the golden boy, but he'd rather be at a party than a construction site. As we got older, the cracks started showing. Mom would laugh off Ethan's absences, saying, "He's just finding himself." Meanwhile, I was the one finding solutions, streamlining the company's payroll, negotiating with suppliers, even sitting with Mom through her chemo appointments. Dad always said, "Grace, you're the backbone of this family." But Ethan was their heart. They'd beam when he'd breeze into town with stories of his big plans in California, while my steady presence was just expected. It wasn't just Ethan. Claire, his wife, had a way of twisting every family gathering into a stage for them. At Thanksgiving, she'd drop comments like, "Oh, Grace, still grinding at the office? You should live a little." My Aunt Linda would nod along, always quick to praise Ethan's vision. My cousin Mark, though, he'd catch my eye across the table like he knew how much it stung. He was one of the few who showed up when Dad's health took a turn, helping with errands, sitting with me in the hospital. Most of the family? They only came around when there was something to gain. When Mom passed 2 years ago, I thought the grief would break me. I threw myself into the company, keeping it afloat while Ethan sent flowers and excuses. Dad lingered another year, his memory fading, but he'd still grip my hand and whisper, "You're my rock, Gracie." I believed him. I thought he saw me. So when he passed 6 months ago, and the whispers about the will started, I never imagined I'd be standing here, watching my life's work handed to someone who didn't care. The favoritism wasn't new, but it hurt more now. Ethan had always been the one who could do no wrong, even when he did nothing at all. I'd spent years proving myself, thinking it would matter. But as I sat in that conference room, the weight of it all crashed down. Had I been invisible to them? Or worse, had they planned this all along? The funeral was a blur of gray skies and strained smiles. St. Mary's Church in our Ohio town was packed, the pews filled with family, employees, and nosy neighbors. I stood near the front, clutching a tissue, trying to focus on the pastor's words about Dad's legacy. But all I could feel were the eyes on me, judging, whispering. Ethan stood beside Claire, his face the perfect mask of grief, though I knew he'd barely spoken to Dad in his final months. Claire dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, her sobs just loud enough to draw attention. As we moved to the cemetery, the air grew heavier. Aunt Linda pulled Ethan aside, her voice low but sharp. "You'll do right by the company, won't you, dear?" I caught the edge in her tone, like she was already staking her claim to whatever scraps Ethan might toss her way. My cousin Mark stayed close to me, his hand brushing my shoulder. "You okay, Grace?" he asked quietly. I nodded, but my chest ached. At the reception in the church basement, the tension boiled over. Claire, holding a glass of wine, sidled up to me as I refilled the coffee urn. "Grace, you must be relieved," she said, her smile sharp as glass. "No more late nights at the office, right? Ethan's got it from here." I froze, the coffee pot trembling in my hands. "Relieved?" I managed, my voice tight. She shrugged, her eyes gleaming. "Well, it's a lot of responsibility. Ethan's ready for it." Before I could respond, Uncle Ray chimed in from across the room, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Always knew Ethan was the one to take the reins. Boy's got vision." A few heads nodded, and I felt my face burn. Vision? Ethan hadn't even known Dad switched suppliers last year to save costs. I wanted to shout it, to make them see, but I bit my tongue. Mark caught my eye again, his jaw tight, like he was holding back his own words. The whispers didn't stop. As I passed a group of cousins near the dessert table, I heard one mutter, "Grace probably thought she'd get it all." Another snickered. "She's not even married. Where's she going to find the time to run a company?" The words stung, each one a tiny cut. I slipped outside for air, the cold biting my cheeks. That's when I noticed Mr. Hargrove, the lawyer, standing alone by his car, his face pale as he fumbled with his briefcase. He looked nervous. Our eyes met for a split second before he hurried away. Back inside, the reception dragged on, but my mind was stuck on Mr. Hargrove. He'd been Dad's lawyer for years, always calm and professional. So why did he look like he was hiding something? I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to my own paranoia, but then something else happened. As I helped clear plates, Mrs. Dawson, Dad's old secretary, pulled me aside. She was in her 70s, frail but sharp, and she'd been with Bennett Construction since the beginning. "Grace," she whispered, her eyes darting to make sure no one was listening. "Your dad, he talked about you all the time, said you were the only one who really understood the business." Her words hit me hard, a flicker of warmth in the cold betrayal. "But he also said something odd a few months before he passed," she continued, her voice dropping lower. "He told me he was making sure you'd be taken care of. Something about a plan. I didn't think much of it then, but—" She trailed off, glancing toward Ethan, who was laughing loudly with Uncle Ray. A plan? My heart raced. Dad had been so foggy in his final months, his memory slipping from dementia. Could he have meant something about the will? I thanked Mrs. Dawson, my mind spinning. Later, as I drove home, I replayed every moment of the funeral. The way Mr. Hargrove avoided my gaze. The way Ethan and Claire seemed so sure of themselves. And then there was that moment at the cemetery, when I'd caught Aunt Linda slipping a small envelope into her purse. It looked like one of Dad's old monogrammed note cards, the kind he used for personal letters. Why would she have it? I pulled into my driveway, my small house feeling emptier than ever. The company wasn't just a job. It was my parents' legacy, my life's work. I'd spent years keeping it alive, even when Dad couldn't anymore. And now it was slipping away. But Mrs. Dawson's words clung to me like a lifeline, a plan. If there was something, anything, Dad had done to protect me, I had to find it. I didn't know how, but I wasn't giving up. Not yet. As I sat in my living room that night, the silence of my house pressed against me. The sting of the funeral and Ethan's smug victory still burned, but Mrs. Dawson's words kept circling in my head. A plan. I closed my eyes, and memories flooded back, pulling me to moments I'd tried to bury. I was 16, trailing Dad through a construction site, my sneakers caked in mud. He'd hand me a clipboard, grinning. "Check these measurements, Gracie. You've got a sharper eye than half my crew." I'd beam, scribbling notes, feeling like I was part of something big. Ethan was off at a football game, probably charming his way through the bleachers. Even then, Mom would say, "Let him have his fun, Grace. You're the one who loves this work. But her smile always softened for him, like he could do no wrong. Fast forward to my 20s when I took over the company's books after Dad's first heart attack. I'd stay up past midnight, hunched over spreadsheets, making sure every cent was accounted for. Ethan was in California by then, chasing investments that never panned out. I'd call him with updates, hoping he'd care, but he'd cut me off with, "Sounds like you've got it covered, sis." Meanwhile, I was the one driving Mom to doctor's appointments, holding her hand when the cancer came back. I never complained. How could I? They were my parents. But every time Ethan swooped in for a holiday, Mom and Dad would light up, hanging on his stories like he was some prodigal hero. One memory hit harder than the rest. 2 years ago, after Mom's funeral, Dad pulled me aside in his study. His hands shook as he poured coffee, his voice raspy. "Grace, you've always been the one I could count on. Don't let anyone tell you different." I thought he meant it as comfort, but now, replaying it, I wondered. Was he trying to tell me something? Had he known even then that Ethan would try to take everything? Another flash. Last summer, when Dad's dementia was worsening. I'd found him in his office staring at a stack of papers. "Gracie," he'd mumbled, "it's all set. You'll see." I'd assumed he was confused, talking nonsense. But what if he wasn't? What if those papers were the key to Mrs. Dawson's plan? The thought made my stomach twist. I'd been so busy keeping the company afloat, I hadn't pushed him to explain. Now, I wished I had. These moments weren't just memories. They were proof. I'd given everything to Bennett Construction, to my parents, while Ethan played the part of the charming son who never had to prove himself. The injustice of it clawed at me. I wasn't just fighting for the company, I was fighting for the truth of who I was to them. The day of the will reading felt like walking into a storm. We were back in that same conference room at Mr. Hargrove's office, the air thick with anticipation. Ethan sat at the head of the table, Claire at his side, her manicured nails tapping impatiently. Aunt Linda and Uncle Ray were there, along with a few cousins, all pretending to be solemn but clearly itching to hear the details. Mark sat next to me, his quiet presence a small comfort. I kept my eyes on Mr. Hargrove, searching for that nervous flicker I'd seen at the funeral. The lawyer cleared his throat, spreading out a stack of documents. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Thomas Bennett," he said, his voice flat. He started with smaller bequests, Mom's jewelry to Aunt Linda, Dad's old truck to Uncle Ray. Then he paused, adjusting his glasses. "As for Bennett Construction, the company and all its assets are to be transferred to Ethan James Bennett, effective immediately." The room went still. Ethan's grin widened, and Claire let out a small, triumphant hum. Aunt Linda nodded approvingly, whispering, "That's right, Tommy always knew Ethan was the one." My heart sank, the weight of it crushing. I stared at the table, my vision blurring. This was it. Everything I'd worked for, gone. Ethan leaned forward, his voice smooth. "I'll make sure the company stays in good hands, Grace. Don't worry." His tone was patronizing, like he was tossing me a bone. Claire chimed in. "We're thinking of expanding to the West Coast. Big opportunities out there." My cousins murmured, some nodding like they were already planning their cut. I couldn't speak. The room felt like it was closing in, their voices a dull roar in my ears. Mr. Hargrove shuffled his papers again, his hands unsteady. He glanced at me, just for a second, and I caught it. That same nervous look. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice quieter now. Everyone froze. Ethan's smile faltered. Claire's nails stopped tapping. I leaned forward, my pulse racing. What was he holding back? Mr. Hargrove's words hung in the air like a spark about to ignite. "One more thing," he repeated, his voice steadier now, though his hands still shook as he pulled a sealed envelope from his briefcase. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Ethan's eyes narrowed, and Claire's grip on his arm tightened. Aunt Linda leaned forward, her lips pursed, while Mark shot me a quick glance, his expression unreadable. The lawyer opened the envelope, pulling out a single sheet of paper with Dad's familiar scrawl across it. "This is an addendum to Thomas Bennett's will, dated 3 months before his passing," Mr. Hargrove said. "It was notarized and kept in a separate file per his instructions." My heart pounded. 3 months ago? Dad was barely coherent then. But I remembered those moments when he'd seemed so clear, so determined. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat and read, "To my daughter, Grace Elizabeth Bennett, I leave full control and ownership of Bennett Construction, including all assets, shares, and decision-making authority. This supersedes any prior arrangements. Grace has been the heart and soul of this company, and I trust her to carry it forward." The room erupted. Ethan shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "What? That's impossible!" he shouted, his face red. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "This is a mistake. He wasn't in his right mind." Aunt Linda's jaw dropped, and Uncle Ray muttered something under his breath. My cousins exchanged shocked glances, their murmurs rising like a swarm of bees. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the table, afraid to believe it. Mr. Hargrove raised a hand for silence. "There's more," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Mr. Bennett included a personal note. "Grace, you've carried this family and this company when no one else would. Ethan, I love you, but you've chosen a different path. This is my way of making things right." The words hit me like a wave, warm and overwhelming. Dad saw me. He knew. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back, refusing to break down in front of everyone. Ethan was pacing now, his voice rising. "This is fraud. He had dementia. There's no way he wrote this." Claire nodded furiously, her voice shrill. "We'll contest it. We'll take this to court." Mr. Hargrove held up the notarized document, his expression firm. This was witnessed by 2 independent parties, and a medical evaluation confirmed Thomas was lucid when he signed it. It's legally binding. Ethan stopped pacing, his face pale. Claire's mouth opened, but no words came out. The room fell into a heavy, stunned silence. Mark reached under the table, giving my hand a quick squeeze. For the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe. As the reality sank in, the room shifted. Aunt Linda avoided my gaze, her hands twisting in her lap. Uncle Ray mumbled something about needing some air and shuffled out. My cousins, who'd been so quick to side with Ethan, now sat awkwardly, their eyes darting to the floor. Ethan slumped back into his chair, his earlier confidence gone. Claire whispered something to him, but he just shook his head, staring at the table like he could will the words away. Mr. Hargrove gathered his papers, his voice calm. "Grace, we'll need to meet to finalize the transfer of assets. The company is yours." I nodded, still dazed, my mind replaying Dad's note. Making things right. Those words meant more than the company itself. They were proof that he'd seen my sacrifices, my loyalty, even when I felt invisible. I stood, smoothing my skirt, and looked at Ethan. Part of me wanted to gloat, to throw his smug words back in his face. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "I'll keep the company running the way Dad would have wanted. If you ever want to be part of it, Ethan, the door's open." His eyes flicked up, surprised, but he didn't respond. Claire tugged at his arm, her face sour, and they left without another word. As the room emptied, Mark stayed behind. "You deserve this, Grace," he said quietly. "Always did." I smiled, grateful for the one person who'd been in my corner. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter than I had in months. The company wasn't just a business. It was Dad's legacy, and now it was mine to protect. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just about money or power. It was about truth, about being seen for who you are. I'd spent years doubting myself, wondering if my work mattered. But Dad's final act showed me it did. Sometimes, justice comes quietly, in a single sheet of paper, and it's sweeter than any revenge. Hey, thanks for sticking with my story. What did you think of that twist? Drop a comment below. Did you see it coming, or did it catch you by surprise? And if you love this tale of family drama and justice, hit that subscribe button and join the crew for more stories like this. Let's keep the conversation going.